All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the deeply complex, totally borderless world of today's youth. We are looking at a massive sociological landscape here, a truly global phenomenon, where young people from vastly different geographies are basically sharing the exact same interconnected reality. So you really have to ask yourself this pretty provocative question. What exactly defines a generation with absolutely no borders? Because honestly, this is one of the greatest paradoxes of our time. Think about it. Today's youth are, without a doubt, the most documented generation in human history. Every click, every post, every single trend is recorded. Yet despite this absolute mountain of data, researchers keep pointing out that they are often the least understood. The internet revolution has made their experience so radically different from anything that came before it that we simply cannot rely on the old rule books to understand them. Whether you're managing them, teaching them, or raising them, those old frameworks just aren't going to cut it anymore. To help wrap our heads around all this, we're going to hit 5 main pillars today: the global/local paradox, the digital double-edged sword, culture, identity, and expression, the activist generation, and finally, the wellness crisis. Let's get right into it. Kicking things off with Section 1, the global/local paradox, bridging the geographical divide. It's kind of like a giant tug of war. On one side, we have this massive global homogenization. You've got young people sharing the exact same media, the same trends, and building these deeply interconnected futures online. But on the other side, local identity is still fiercely relevant. I mean, they're still dealing with localized economic pressures and very real on-the-ground geographical realities. Take Malaysia, for instance. The research points out that just 25 years ago, before their massive industrialization, youth as a distinct cultural group barely even existed there. Young people just transitioned almost immediately from childhood directly into adult roles. But now, driven by all these tech shifts, they are fully plugged into a globalized youth culture, constantly having to balance these huge international trends with their local Malaysian heritage. So, what are we actually talking about when we say global youth culture? Well, the source research formally defines it as a rapidly evolving technocentric culture. It's completely rooted in the pursuit and virtual dissemination of knowledge, which allows it to transcend traditional geographical boundaries. The key takeaway here is that the internet didn't just change how they chat with each other, it fundamentally altered how they build their very culture. Which brings us to Section 2, the digital double-edged sword. Connection versus isolation in Web 2.0. To really understand their digital world, you just have to look at the sheer scale of competitive gaming. It is absolutely wild. Esports has exploded to become the world's largest entertainment sector. We're talking officially bigger than the music and film industries combined. It's filling massive physical arenas with hundreds of thousands of fans and reaching millions more online, creating these huge, totally borderless communities driven entirely by youth consumers. But how does all this technology actually make them feel? Well, researchers ran focus groups with middle schoolers in some incredibly diverse spots: Morocco, Hungary, and India. And you know what? The emotional responses were strikingly identical across borders. The youth universally expressed this profound awe and appreciation for their devices. They rely on them heavily for fun and vital peer communication. Yet, they also reported intense boredom when they were disconnected and some serious negativity too, including deep feelings of loneliness and the very real constant threat of cyberbullying. So it's a real double-edged sword. Web 2.0 offers unprecedented community and expression. Young people are building parasocial relationships with highly relatable micro-influencers and finding their unique tribes online. But it also creates what researchers call the quantified self. Many young folks basically find themselves living in a digital fishbowl where every single action is socially reviewed and tallied up. It fosters this addiction to attention that researchers actually compare to a gambling culture, where likes and shares start to dictate their self-worth. Moving right along to Section 3, culture, identity, and expression, focusing on the homogenization of pop culture. Pop culture is how they express themselves, and hip-hop's global dominance is just off the charts. We are seeing engagement levels where 75% of youth in Latin America, 50% in the US, and 43% in Asia are frequent listeners. Hip-hop has completely transcended its origins. It's become this universal, shared language for youth all over the planet because it provides a highly adaptable framework for individual expression. It's grounded in these localized, relatable experiences of struggle and overcoming barriers, no matter where you live. And then, of course, we have the incredible rise of K-pop. Actually, you have to scratch the idea that K-pop is just a Korean export. It is a meticulously crafted hybrid model. Sure, the music and visuals originate in South Korea, But the producers and choreographers, they're sourced from Hong Kong, Japan, the US, and Europe. And the most important part, the fandom, is entirely driven by global youth demographics who take this music and create their own incredibly complex, borderless rituals around it. Now, with all this global blending of cultures, the conversation around how we share culture has gotten incredibly complex. The research spends time highlighting cultural appropriation, which is defined objectively as the act of taking or using elements from a culture that is not your own, and it is heavily contextual. A prime example cited in the text is a 2017 Marc Jacobs runway show that featured models with purple braids, which instantly sparked immense online debate. This perfectly highlights just how highly attuned and vocal today's youth are regarding cultural sensitivity. They are actively using their digital platforms to constantly negotiate the boundaries of identity. And that heightened social awareness leads us perfectly into Section 4, the activist generation, Voices Without Borders. This generation sees themselves as vital changemakers, but this activism didn't just happen overnight. It's been building for decades. We can trace it from the 1990s, when the UN really began framing climate change globally, up to 2012, where we saw new media directly driving huge spikes in youth voter turnout. And then, in 2018, Greta Thunberg sparks the Fridays for Future movement. Today's youth are utilizing their digital networks to fiercely demand intergenerational equity, insisting that they and future generations are recognized as equal stakeholders in global policies. The sources also document the incredible impact of hashtag activism on grassroots organizing, looking specifically at the Black Lives Matter movement. The stated goals of the movement, as analyzed in the text, involve bringing attention to structural racism, pursuing restorative justice, and elevating the discourse around reimagining Black futures. By utilizing social media, youth are able to organize on a massive global scale. They're completely bypassing traditional gatekeepers to digitally mobilize and memorialize victims. We also see a massive, truly global push from youth for LGBTQ+ rights. They are demanding social, cultural, and political inclusion while actively combating transphobia and heteronormativity. But the research points out a really stark paradox here. While youth are using digital platforms powerfully for self-advocacy, they're simultaneously facing severe physical discrimination, and in some nations they're facing continued legal criminalization. So the immense freedom they find online does not always match their physical reality. That intense clash between digital connection and real-world struggle transitions us to our final section, number 5, the wellness crisis, coping in a hyper-connected world. The text documents a pretty sobering reality when it comes to mental health. Currently, only 10% of youth in low- and middle-income countries receive any sort of professional mental health care. And even in high-income countries, the specific developmental needs of adolescents are frequently just unmet by existing care systems. So, in the absence of traditional care, where do they turn? The internet, of course. Take the hashtag Fitspo, or fitness inspiration phenomenon on Instagram. Youth overwhelmingly embrace these hashtags to construct their identities and try to manage their physical health. But researchers note that while these influencers offer a real sense of community, they also frequently push inaccurate health claims. This leaves young people having to blend traditional health advice with counterintuitive, heavily aesthetic-driven ideas of what wellness actually is. When it comes to dealing with mental health and medication stigma, the tactics young people use are incredibly resourceful, but they really show a system under strain. The studies outline how youth rely on older peers to basically broker support within schools. They use selective disclosure, confiding only in a few highly trusted teachers to manage clinic visits. And increasingly, they are turning to venture capital-backed, often totally unregulated digital mental health apps and chatbots, quite simply because they are accessible right there on a smartphone. So what does this all mean for the next decade? Well, the research predicts a shift away from fragmentation and toward a grand technological synthesis. We're definitely going to see the continued rise of alternative, highly flexible education models, which were massively accelerated by the pandemic. We are also observing a generation actively reevaluating capitalism, demanding that brands actually align with their social values, rather than just expecting blind loyalty. But most importantly, for educators, brands, and policymakers, there is a vital, pressing need for localized research. We simply cannot assume that Western frameworks apply to this incredibly diverse global youth culture. Which leaves us with a really big question to chew on. We've just mapped out a generation completely defined by paradoxes. They're hyper-connected, yet isolated, globally aligned, yet locally grounded. The challenge for all of us isn't just to observe them, but to actually engage with them on their terms. How will educators, brands, and policymakers adapt to support a generation that essentially lives everywhere and nowhere all at once? Think about your own role in this rapidly shifting landscape. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.